Welcome to Bringing Jesus Back into Focus. I'm Christopher John Joseph. We'll be looking at the Gospels of Jesus Unplugged, a new translation of the Gospels of Jesus by a Christian. I've never been a Jewish Christian, even though I was born into the Jewish Christian Catholic Church in 1957. I left when I was 16 or 17 because they were teaching that the Yahweh God of the Jews was the same divine source of perfect love that Jesus was at one with. Now, I knew at that stage of my youth that that's incorrect because, of course, the Jews, as we all know, worship two completely different gods. One God says, this is Yahweh. Joshua, go down to Jericho. I'm going to give you Jericho. I'm Yahweh, your God. You are my children. I'm going to give it to you. Go down and you'll defeat their army easily and take it all for yourselves. Thank you, Yahweh. He gets the Jewish soldiers off, they go down to Jericho. They bust through the walls and they kill every man, every woman and every little child. They steal the gold, the silver and the brass from the temple. They burn the place to the ground and steal all the land. And they take all that silver and gold and brass back to the temple of Yahweh. That is a war god. That is Sekhmet, the Egyptian war god Sekhmet. Almost exactly the same as Yahweh one, the war god. Ares, the Greek war god, brutal killer. Mars, Roman war god, killer, invade, steal, dominate. The Jews had a war god, a killer, brutal, revengeful. Don't do what he says and he'll kill you. Like all war gods. They called it Yahweh. Okay, fine, great, good name, okay, whatever. They had another god of love, who said, if someone from Jericho, who is a foreigner, is amongst you, treat them as if they're a Jew. Love them like you would a Jew. That's in Leviticus. That's another god. That's the god of Pax of the Romans, the peace and loving god. Irene, the Greeks' god of love and peace. The Egyptians' god of sort of peace was Shu. Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and everyone else, but they had separate temples, different names, they're different identities. You can't say that the beautiful, pure, white, loving God is the same as the stinking, filthy, murdering, genocidal, bastard over here. You can't say that. And by saying, oh, we'll just call them by the same name, that means nothing to me, I assure you. I've got a brain, I've got some logic, I've got some intelligence. And by 16, I was out of the Jewish Christian Catholic Church because of that lie. They shouldn't teach that. It's clearly not true. One God. What a joke. And then they were saying, well, this book of Revelation, that is Jesus coming on the clouds with the God who's going to, Yahweh is going to, Jesus is going to starve people to death and start wars and all this stuff. So I had to get out. I took Jesus with me, though. See, that's what's different. I love him. I love his way. But I only ever saw him as love and non-violence. So I've never been poisoned by the Jewish religion. But the poison of the Jewish religion has spilled over onto the Christian religion back around the time of Emperor Constantine for certain. By then it was already sort of creeping in, but that was when the pacifist Christians were wiped out. Christians could go and kill and murder again like the Jews. So in other words, they became Jewish and Christian, Judeo-Christian. That's when it really started. Big time, this poisoning of the Christian religion by creating this hybrid Christian who's part Jewish and part Christian. Neither fully one nor the other. I'm just a Christian. I'm not a Jewish Christian. So I wrote the Gospels of Jesus Unplugged to provide a much clearer and easier read of the Gospels of Jesus. I've removed all the apocalyptic lies that have been put in there. I've made sure the Greek interlinear translations are more correct in what Jesus is trying to express and about love and non-violence. And it's published around the world. And you can buy it as an ebook too. There's a first edition, don't get that one. I had to put that out because I'm suffering from a rather deadly physical illness. And it's been a real struggle to do any of these works for Jesus and the loving Creator these last 3 years. But they wanted me to do it because they drew me into it. I didn't really know what I was getting into, really. Because I've always known them as love and non-violence. And it was only when I investigated all these different denominations in Melbourne, Australia, that I was so shocked how some of them were just synagogues, but they were saying they were Christians. They were just Jews. And Jesus was just a sacrificial lamb. I thought, wow, that's all Jewish. Why aren't you looking at his words? Oh, no, he died on the cross. That's all we need. What about his words? He said 17 times, his words will save you. Oh, yeah. At one church, I said, oh, yeah, there's a book with all these words in down the back there. I went, wow. And all they did was talk about the Jewish religion. Oh, blimey. And the book of Revelations, he's coming on the clouds. He didn't say he's coming back. He said, follow me to where I've gone. Get into your spiritual body before your flesh dies. Moving on, we're into Matthew, the chapter on Matthew. It's a long chapter because I've combined, for example here, you represent me. Now I've combined Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, the same sayings or part sayings. I've brought them all into the one complete saying. So my book's sort of shorter and easier to read. You don't have to read the sorrow of the parable 3 times or this thing 4 times. You represent me. You don't have to see that repeated 4 times as you read through all the Gospels. I've brought them together and included all of the important points from the different readings into the one account. So it's an easier read, it flows more easily, it's clearer because my language is, I guess, more universal in a sense, but it's still quite traditional as well. Matthew 10, 40, 42, you represent me. Jesus said, he who receives whom I send receives me, and he who receives me receives our loving spiritual Creator who sent me. Each shall receive a compensation according to the extent of their belief and understanding. He who accepts me as a prophet shall receive a prophet's compensation, and he who receives me as a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's compensation. And even someone who gives you a cup of water because you are a follower of me in my way will also receive a compensation. But he who rejects you rejects me and my spiritual way of love. And he who rejects me rejects the way of our loving spiritual Creator in the heavenly spiritual world. So you represent me, and as a follower of Jesus, I do have to represent him, and you do too if you're a follower. We have to be children of love. Don't be a Jewish Christian anymore if you are. Cut the Bible in 2, rip out the book of Revelation and burn it, and just look at his words, and you'll start to realize how poisonous the influence of this war god in the Jewish religion is. Only when you come out of it do you see how deadly that war god is to the Christian religion. It's poisoning it. We're only children of love. And we can't reject the loving way, because if we do, we're rejecting heaven. He's saying that. If you shift out of becoming just love into love and hate or love and kill, like Yahweh, the loving Yahweh, the killer Yahweh, that's the dualistic God of the Jews. It's not a monotheistic religion. I wish people would stop saying that lie. Jesus is monotheistic, but then they've laid the Jewish religion God on top of him, making out he's dualistic. He's not. He's not. Author, children see Jesus in different ways. So, of course, this dialogue is saying, depending on how you see me, that's sort of how much you'll awaken spiritually. How you understand my words, that will depend on sort of what you receive out of them, what you get out of them, your understanding. How you see me will depend on what you receive from me. Children see Jesus in different ways. Some have no interest in him at all. Some believe he was a good man, but nothing else. Some believe he was a philosopher who taught a good way to live. And others believe he was an enlightened spiritual child of our loving Creator in heaven. Now, if you believe that last one, then his teachings about turn the other cheek, forgive, don't kill anyone, don't join any army, don't lift up the sword, you'll perish by the sword, don't pick up the gun. If you follow his words, you'll realize he's a spiritually enlightened child and he's connected to another dimension within his spiritual body and spiritual mind, which became fully awakened while he was here. And he said, you've got the same spiritual body in you right now, but it's probably asleep or only partly awake. He said, you've got to wake it up now while you have the chance. That's how you get to heaven. That has to become your primary first identity on earth, your spiritual body and mind of love. You have to move into it now, and then your physical body just manifests love in the material world of dirt and death and suffering. That's what this world is. All love comes from the heavenly loving spiritual world, but it comes through our spiritual body. The chemistry of our brains can create various pleasurable sensations, for sure, and extreme agony, torture. The physical body is dualistic. Extreme pleasure, extreme pain. Same body, dualistic. The spiritual body has nothing to do with biological earth stuff. Nothing. Jesus said it's a spiritual body like an angel's body. You can't die in it. You can't be hurt in it. It can't bleed. It doesn't have blood. You don't eat food. There's no toilet paper in heaven. Don't pack toilet paper when you go into heaven. You won't need it. My understanding is your whole spiritual body is filled with a loving spiritual life force of the loving creator of the spiritual universe and the spiritual world that we'll be in, hopefully, and where no child can even conceive of doing anything hurtful. Only children of love can come there, and that's what keeps other children out. If they're not fully in love within themselves, they simply can't get in, and they have to be cleansed. They have to be washed clean. And the really, really evil children that we have in the world, these satanic armies at the moment, they're Satan's children, murdering and killing around the Middle East. They're all at the moment going into a really horrific, hellish nightmare after they die. They think they're getting away with all this now, but they won't. So Jesus said, be careful. Hell exists, but so does heaven. Go there. He doesn't throw you into hell. He doesn't want you to go there. But if you want to create a hell, he can't stop you. And the loving creator can't stop us from creating hell because you've got free will. They don't want us to create a hell for ourselves. So they said, don't hurt anyone. Because that's what's going to happen to you after you die. You'll be hurt. With what measure you give, you'll receive. Karma. So, you represent me. I hope so. I'm trying to represent him by doing these books, you see. When I heard all these Jewish Christians slandering him and just studying the Jewish religion and what they were doing and all, and then the book of Revelations, I thought, why are you talking about that at all? Rip it out. I was shocked. And I realised now what's gone wrong and where it went wrong. I had to do a bit of research. But I'd like to think, well, I'm representing him, but now I'm actually thinking I'm defending him against all this slander from the so-called Christian churches who are really Jewish Christian churches. They're hybrids. They're not true Christian churches. The Catholic Church isn't a Christian church. It's a Jewish and Christian church. The same with all the others. Seventh-day Adventists, the Mormons, the Jehovah's, whoever. If they think Yahweh is the same divine source of love that Jesus was at one with, they're Jewish. They don't even know it. But they've got the loving creator there because Jesus is there. If they're lucky, they'll just look at Jesus and nothing else in that whole Bible, the two different religions in the one book. Fair dinkum. You got to be joking. Matthew 11, 16, 17. This generation is like, Jesus said, to what shall I liken this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to their companions, saying, we played the flute for you, but you did not dance. We mourned for you, but you did not lament. Thomas 28, Jesus said, I took my stand in the middle of the material world, and in flesh I appeared to people. I found them all drunk, and I did not find any of them thirsty. My soul ached for these mortal children because they are blind of heart and do not see that they came into the world empty, and they will also seek to depart from the world empty. But now they are drunk. When they become sober, they will change their minds. Really beautiful. Really, Thomas is really beautiful. I'm glad that the Nicene Jewish Christians tried to destroy Thomas, because Thomas reveals in Matthew in particular, Matthew altered some of the sayings. Thomas has got the originals, and you can see how the apocalyptic Jew who either overwrote Matthew or Matthew was the apocalyptic Jew, and they've altered Jesus' sayings. It's really beautiful, Thomas. It's an important document of truth. Author, Jesus is sorrowful that children were being intoxicated with temporary material things and were not thirsting after the spiritual truth and heavenly life that he was bringing to them. But once the material civilization with its material way of life collapsed, children turned back to search for a deeper meaning in spiritual life. It's always been the way. Once material civilizations rise into a cult of the materialists, like Rome, the Colosseum, and our modern societies, these huge cities, and entertainment, and enjoy yourself, just have a good time, casinos, crash. As spirit wanes and decreases, then the collapse is nearer. It's only spirituality that can keep a civilization going for centuries. Good spirituality. It has to be good. It has to be loving spirituality. Any civilization based on a spiritual understanding of life, they can survive for thousands of years. Like the Australian Aborigines, 50,000 years, something like that they were here. And they had spiritual teachings, profound moral laws and codes that everyone had to follow. They had their own versions of what we call parables, storytelling about animals, and various stories where they teach their children the right and the wrong way of life. They respected everything was sacred, everything. That is a real beautiful thing. And they lasted 50,000 years or something. Then the Poms came in, of which I've descended sort of thing. And within a few hundred years, we've nearly destroyed the place. The forests, polluted the rivers, you name it. And our society's full of casinos and gambling and alcohol and drugs. And we can't last long, We won't be lasting 50,000 years, that's for sure. So Jesus is sorry, he knows how important the spiritual life is, but they just don't listen to the true spiritual life. The Jews thought they had some sort of mangled up two-headed God spiritual existence thing going on, but it was all perverted, two-headed God. Children find the truth. Matthew 11:25-27. Jesus said, I thank you, loving Creator of the heavenly spiritual world, that you have hidden these things from the clever and cautious ones and have revealed them to simple little children. For in this manner your purpose comes before you. All things have been entrusted to me by our loving Creator, and no one knows the spiritual child of our loving Creator except the loving spiritual Creator. Nor does anyone know our loving spiritual Creator except her spiritual child, and the one to whom that child reveals her to. So Jesus is an awakened spiritual being. He's enlightened. He can tell you and me how to become one too. And then we'll find out, this spiritual God's only love. Oh, great. I don't have to be frightened of her anymore. Like Yahweh, the war God. Blessed are your eyes that see what you have seen, for I say to you that many prophets and kings desired to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and they did not hear it. Author, Jesus sees the wisdom of our loving spiritual Creator guiding him to teach simple fishermen and ordinary people these profound spiritual truths, as they are not filled with their own self-importance. Jesus says that only awakened spiritual children will really know our loving spiritual Creator, and they can help others find her. And of course he had no hope of getting the scribes and Pharisees and the Jewish leaders of their two-headed God religion. There's no way known he could have talked to them about the one loving spiritual Creator, because they would have killed him. Blasphemy, kill him. And so he had to go to simple people who, like most people in the world, you got your religious leaders in their temples, whatever, or churches, whatever. And then the average folk are working for a living out in the fields, grinding wheat and, trying to scrape up a living. And spirituality is important, but life is tough. So they're not heavily studying spiritual scriptures or anything like scribes and Pharisees or whatever, or rabbis. So these people Jesus could give very simple parables to. And he could draw them out of the two-headed God religion of the Jews, the dualistic religion, the war God and the God of love, and slowly move them across to just the God of love, that Yahweh love is there, and then even expanded out into the actual singularity of the one loving spiritual creator for everyone. That's where he was. And only the simple people, fishermen, couldn't even read and write probably, they could listen, and they weren't overburdened with all the brainwashing of the Jewish religion, like the scribes and Pharisees. Oh, you're carrying your mat on the Sabbath? Oh, we'll stone you to death, all these crackpot laws they had. Well, the local people just weren't interested in, being the policeman of God sort of thing. And he could preach to them. And they heard him, and he loved them. And they said, he's really different. You see it in the Gospels, people saying, this man's really different. He's not like the scribes and Pharisees. No, he only worships the God of perfect love. He can't be like the scribes and Pharisees. They worship a filthy satanic war god and a God of love, which is limited anyway to just them, exclusion. Take my yoke upon you. Matthew 11:28-30. Jesus said, come and follow me, all you who are wearied and heavy laden, and I will refresh you. Take my yoke and spiritual way upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is pleasant and my burden is light. Author. The spiritual way of love of Jesus refreshes our spirits and souls through receiving the loving spiritual life force from heaven to sustain our journey through this temporary material world and help us carry all burdens through the power of love. If we look at our life, no matter what's happening to us, and we try to look at the situation in a loving way, even though it's a very dangerous or difficult situation or suffering situation, it's that love that connects you to the heavenly world where you hopefully will be when your body of flesh dies and rots and stinks, and you'll leave in a beautiful spiritual body that you've already been living out of and is alive and well, and you don't hurt anyone, and you care about others, you're kind, compassionate, forgiving. Then we'll be free of all suffering. And love isn't heavy to carry. Hatred's heavy, Hatred's like heavy. Hate, heavy. Love is light. So love isn't any burden to carry. I mean, when someone's in love, you feel light as a feather, I feel like I could fly. I'm in love, I feel like I could fly. There it is. That's the lightness of being in love. That's the spiritual mind, except it's biological chemicals kicking in at puberty, but but it gives you that rush of chemical sensations and experiences and emotions. But that is sort of like a complementary thing to the spiritual joy. Spiritual joy is more subtle, but way more beautiful. And spiritual love is, of course, not biological. Biological love just expresses spiritual love, sort of, well, it should anyway. But spiritual love is more subtle, but more beautiful, more serene, and it's everlasting. So that's the love you really want. So love isn't any sort of heavy burden to carry. Loving someone is, something we should all do. Whomever we meet, love them, sort of thing, in whatever way they need love. Don't hurt anyone. Take my yoke and my spiritual way upon you and learn from me. Gentle and humble in heart. Fantastic. See, he's a child of a loving spiritual being in a heavenly spiritual world, but he's connected. His nexus, as they call it, is open. He's connected to heaven. He's got one foot on heaven, one foot on this earth. I sometimes talk about it as the two bodies, the earthly body and the spiritual body, are like two planks crossing over the river. They meet in the middle. His spiritual body, firmly planted on the heavenly spiritual world, meets in the middle above the river to his earthly body. Legs firmly planted on the dirt. The earth body goes back to the earth world, spiritual body goes back to the spiritual world. At the moment they look like they're one body, but they're not. They're two in one. And if your spiritual body is alive and your loving life force is coming from heaven into the way you live your life with your family and your workplace, you're honest and all the rest of it, you are living more in heaven now, whether you know it or not, than you are on earth, which is just dirt and death and suffering in the end. Beautiful. Take my yoke upon you. Be like me. Oh, yeah. Plucking grain. Matthew 12:1-8. One Sabbath, Jesus and his disciples were going through a grain field, and the disciples plucked some grain to eat. The Pharisees saw this and said to Jesus, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath." He replied, "Have you never read what David did when he and those with him were hungry, and entered the sacred house of Yahweh and ate the sacred bread there meant for only priests, which is not lawful to do? If you only knew what 'I desire mercy, not sacrifice' means, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For I tell you, a greater sacred place exists right here in me, making the spiritual child of humanity master of the Sabbath." The Sabbath was not made for man. The Sabbath was made for man, The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Sorry about that. Getting a bit tired. Author. Jesus was not that interested in man's laws, but was referring to the loving spiritual life force of our loving Creator in his spiritual body that comes from the heavenly spiritual world, a far greater and sacred spiritual presence than any found in the temple of the two-headed God of the Jews, Yahweh. That's what he meant when he said, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice," means you would not have condemned the guiltless. For I tell you, a greater sacred place exists right here in me. So he's saying, David went in with his mates and they ate the special bread in the Yahweh temple. They shouldn't have done that. And Yahweh is a very special sacred place for the two-headed gods of the Jews. Their murdering war god and their god of love, who are in the one temple, called by the same name, even though they're completely different gods. A lie. Not the same name, different names. Jesus is saying a far greater sacred place exists right here in me. He is connected to heaven. His spiritual body is alive. A building of stone and temples honoring the two-headed God Yahweh, that's not connected to heaven. Jesus' spiritual body and your spiritual body and my spiritual body, if it's filled with the loving life force from heaven, you are connected. You are heaven on earth, and you express it through your physical life of love and non-violence. You are heaven on earth if your spiritual mind is alive and well, and you need to live it out of your body of flesh before it dies. And don't even worry if it does die, Jesus said. Make sure your spiritual body is healthy and well, and be good and kind and loving, and you'll be okay on the other side of the death experience that you will pass through and out of the body. Don't be covered in filthy dark murder, because when you leave your body of flesh, you'll be in the darkness, not in heaven, which is light. Beautiful. A divided house falls. Matthew 12:22-30. A demon-possessed, blind, and mute man was brought to Jesus, and he healed him, so he could speak and see. All the multitudes were amazed, but the Pharisees said, "He casts out demons by the power of Satan, the ruler of demons." Jesus said, "Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand. If Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then will his kingdom stand? And if I by Satan's power cast out demons, by whom do your sons cast them out? By this let them be your judges. But if I cast out demons by the loving spiritual life force of our loving Creator, surely the heavenly spiritual world has arrived upon you. Or how can anyone enter the strong man's house and carry off his property unless he first binds the strong man? Then he will be able to plunder his house. He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters abroad." the first big point there is, of course, Jesus is casting out demons and healing through the loving spiritual life force from heaven in him. That's how he's healing. They should know that. That's coming from this very powerful and beautiful loving God. And then the second part, no one can enter a strong man's house and carry off his property unless he first binds the strong man. He's talking about sin there. Thomas 103, Jesus said, "Blessed is the person who knows where the robbers will enter. Then the person may arise and bring his resources together and prepare himself before they break in." Those two sayings about don't commit sin, because temptation to sin will rob you of the loving spiritual life force from heaven. It'll leak out of you. It's a bit like water in a vase. Your spiritual body is the water, your body of flesh is the vase. All vases are smashed at the end of your life and disintegrate and go back into the earth, all made of clay. The water spills out of the vase and evaporates. You never see water evaporate unless you see the steam first, but steam is actually just steam water. You actually won't see water evaporate if it's just sitting there on a piece of concrete on a warm day. All you'll see is the water gets smaller and it just disappears. You don't see the particles of water leave. That is exactly what happens at death, Jesus said. You won't see your spiritual body leave, like you won't see another person's spiritual body leave with your eyeballs of flesh, but it's leaving. The vase is smashed, the water spills out. The body dies, your spiritual body goes out of the body. It can't stay in there anymore. It's dead. Your spiritual body is alive, so it leaves. It's an extraordinary thing how Jesus gives us so many beautiful things to follow so we can get to heaven. If you put them together properly, they all make sense logically and intelligently, build on top of each other. So Jesus often warns us not to be divided within ourselves, or we will be in darkness, and our spiritual house will fall, but always be at one with love. I mean, he starts off this dialogue by saying a house divided against itself, Satan divided against himself, a country divided against itself, it crumbles, it falls apart. That's why he said you've got to be at one with love, singular. So Jesus often warns us not to be divided within ourselves, or we will be in darkness, and our spiritual house will fall, but always be at one only with love. He was able to perform these miracles by only acknowledging the loving spiritual creator and her loving spiritual life force, which opposes all satanic evil, just as light destroys all darkness. The Jews worshipped a satanic war god along with the god of love and called them both Yahweh. So that was poisoning the understanding of the one true loving spiritual creator. He also warns us not to lose our spiritual strength by being tempted and having our spirits bound by sin. If your spirit's tied up, you could sin. For only if we let temptation and sin into our spiritual home and life can we be robbed of our spiritual merit and life force. If we become aware of a temptation or dark way about to encroach on our life, for our own doing or others, we must counter-attack it with the spiritual qualities of love, light and truth that come forth from heaven. All children in this world who follow the spiritual way of love and non-violence that Jesus taught are with him. And since he's in heaven waiting for us, it's a comfort to know that he made it there. And he's not coming back on the clouds. He said, follow me to where I'm going. He even said to Peter, don't worry, you'll follow me later when you die. So there's more of Matthew. Jesus' general dialogues, you can see how they all flow into each other. They all support each other. Once you get rid of the Jewish distortions or the Jewish overlays or the Matthew's done some actual deliberate, just perverted, some of the parables in Thomas are just totally altered into something else. The whole focus has shifted into, good and bad fish, the apocalypse, where it wasn't about that at all in Thomas. So we know there's been tampering centuries and centuries and centuries ago. But the thing is, if you know his love and non-violence, you'll see these things and you'll realise that it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like Jesus. He's love. How could that be right? Well, if you look into it further, you'll understand where it's gone wrong. And that's why I've written the books, to help true Christians who only want to be Christians and don't want to be Jewish Christians anymore, and who believe, like me, that Jewish God is not the God of Jesus. There is a loving Yahweh there, yes, but it's not the universal spiritual creator that Jesus became at one with. And Buddha too. Nirvana, heaven, same place. A spiritual world of no suffering. An existence where there's no suffering but great love and joy. But only children of love can go there, because Jesus said, the spiritual creator, her love is like the sun that rises on the good and the evil. Her love is like the rain that falls on the just and the unjust. She's kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Unless your love is as perfect as this, you're not entering heaven. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Bless those who curse you. Do good to them that harm you. Turn the other cheek. So, I'm a pacifist Christian. I belong to the first group of followers that Jesus had in the world. There's a few of us left in the world following that tradition that Jesus originally gave. I do not worship Yahweh, I assure you of that, because there's two Yahwehs there to start with. So which one are you going to worship? The good one or the evil one? So you can't worship Yahweh. You can't use the word Yahweh. You've got to say Yahweh 1 or Yahweh 2. Yippee Yahoo. A dualistic two-headed God. Love your way to heaven. Jesus gives us beautiful dialogues, and his words make sense once you've got them in a much better way to read them. They flow more easily once you know as a Christian. Once you become a Christian, if you're a Jewish Christian, you have to shift your cross to become with us, with Christians. We're the Christians. We're not Jewish Christians. Our beliefs are different to Jewish Christians. We follow the way of Jesus to heaven of love and non-violence. We're pacifist Christians. We rip out the book of Revelations, rip it up and burn it, because that's the book of Daniel from the old Jewish religion. It shouldn't be in the New Testament. It's an Old Testament book. An apocalyptic Jew put it in there to assassinate who Jesus was and who the loving Creator is, and to make Christians go back. It's like a detour sign. Go back now and worship the two-headed God of the Jews who kills and murders. That's what the book of Revelation is all about. An apocalyptic Jew put that in, very clever, very cunning. And it destroys the pathway to just love and non-violence, that brings you into the world of a spiritual being whose mind is pure love. That is the God of Jesus. I must become her child of love on earth to the greatest extent I possibly can. I might get to 90%, 94, 95, 96. But Jesus got to 100% and became fully enlightened, fully committed to the spiritual way of love and non-violence. Buddha, 100%, fully committed. Both of them knew that when their body of flesh died, they weren't going to die. They both knew that. They had a spiritual body of love that came alive. Jesus and Buddha too. But Jesus is my primary teacher from birth. And I love talking about him because there aren't many Christians talking about him. And the Jewish Christians lie about him. And so I'm here to defend him. How weird is that? I'm just a gardener. But I'm sure heaven chose me to do this because they said, you know we're only love and non-violence. And I say, yeah, but I'm not a theologian. I don't know the Greek language or anything. And they said, you can study. You can see where the problems are. You can do it. So I've done it, and it's as good as I can do while I'm very ill. It's a miracle I've done this work, I've got to tell you that. It's a total miracle. Every single day I nearly die now from the neurotoxic fungal infection in my body. It's brutal. So I'm just enjoying doing this. I ramble on too much, but I'm fairly isolated now. But it's interesting how when the world turns against you, you turn to God. I mean, if you're a Christian, you turn to the loving Creator. If you're a Jew or a Jewish Christian, you might be a bit, well, you still turn to God, but if you know Jesus, you'll get there. Even if you're in a Jewish Christian church, you can reach heaven, but just stay with Jesus. Just avoid the old Jewish religion. Whatever you do, don't listen to anything from the book of Revelation. Just don't, ignore it. Just put your earphones in and listen to music while they're talking about it. Don't listen to that. They're slandering Jesus. And they're slandering the God of Jesus. They don't realise they're doing it because they're Jewish Christians. They worship Yahweh, the two-headed God of the Jews, not the one loving creator that Jesus tried to bring the Jews out of, to come to. Come out of that dualistic God and come to the one loving God that the good prophets were telling you about. Well, I know her now. I'm her child now. I can wake you up too, and you can be her children too. Oh, no, we don't want that. We don't want to be pacifists. Let's kill him. We love our war God. We love to kill. Love your way to heaven. Hate your way to hell. It's your choice. Bye for now.